Secret Service are satisfied with the response, basically everything that happened after this guy rushed in. But are they satisfied with the planning? Was the front end planning for this event sufficient, or did they rely on an old playbook that may not work in 2026 with a president who is, so often become a target of violence?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. Today on the show, the man accused of opening fire outside the White House Correspondents' dinner was arraigned in a D.C. court today. What questions the event raises about federal security. Plus, the red carpet is being rolled out for the royals, why King Charles's trip to the U.S. could be vital for international diplomacy. But first, we're learning more about what happened ahead of the shooting on Saturday. At a press briefing this afternoon, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt praised the Secret Service for preventing an attack on the president.
Within minutes, the president, the first lady, the vice president, members of the president's cabinet were ushered out of the room. The perpetrator, who sought to inflict massive harm, as we all now know with the release of the manifesto on administration officials and the president himself, was stopped at the security perimeter that was set up. He tried to charge through it, as you saw on video, and he was quickly neutralized by Secret Service, and thank God that he was.
Cole Thomas Allen, the man accused of opening fire outside the dinner, was arraigned in federal court today, charged with an assassination attempt. Allen was stopped by law enforcement before he entered the ballroom, but at an event with the president, vice president, and almost the entire cabinet on site, questions remain about the security measures in place and what can be done to tighten up in the future. I happened to be at the dinner sitting near NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, who's been following the aftermath of the shooting and joins me now. Hi, Garrett.
Hi, Chris.
Well, that was quite a night. The man accused of opening fire outside the dinner, he has been charged now with attempting to assassinate the president of the United States and then 2 firearms-related counts. What more do we know about the shooter and his motivations today?
Well, we know he made his way across the country from California with this intent in mind, and we know that mostly from writings that he left behind that were ultimately provided to NBC News by a senior administration official, in which he basically apologized to his friends and family for what he was going to try to do. He outlined a list of targets. He doesn't name the president, but he makes it pretty clear that that's who he's talking about, and says that, he and other cabinet officials are going to be targets, that he did not intend to harm anyone else working in the hotel, but he felt that something had to be done, basically, about our country's leadership. I think in the charging documents, we also learned the answer to one other question, which is he's charged with essentially using that firearm. We were wondering whether or not the officer who we know was injured in this case, who took a bullet to the bulletproof vest, might have been struck by friendly fire, or if the suspect ever actually discharged his firearm. At least the federal prosecutors believe that the suspect was the shooter of that person. So we got some more answers today, and I think more will come as this investigation and prosecution progress.
Yeah, one of those counts, discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence. I wonder, should he have been on the FBI's radar?
It's not really clear. There was some reporting about, when he, wrote these writings and how they were transmitted to his family members, who then ultimately tried to share them with police, whether that could have been done quicker. Also, it appears that he was fairly active on social media in political spaces and attending political rallies, but that alone doesn't necessarily make you someone who is worthy of being watched by the federal government, right? We don't live in a surveillance state. Not everybody who takes anti-government or anti-administration positions is a threat or needs to be watched by anyone. That's not the kind of country we live in. But whether any of his past statements, past comments online rose to the level of being a threat or the kind of thing that should have put him on, federal law enforcement's radar, I think, again, is one of those things that's going to come out in the wash as this investigation progresses.
Garrett, this is a really strange story for us to cover because we were there together.
Yeah.
We were both at the dinner along with a number of our NBC colleagues who sprang into action, and we suddenly were tables of newsrooms, trying to report this after it happened. I want to talk about what happened before the shooting. On the way into the building, I only had to show my ticket. I didn't have to show an ID, and no one really read the ticket. I just sort of flashed the ticket. We stopped for some pictures, and then after that, we had to go through security to get close to the ballroom and to get into the ballroom. I went through with an umbrella, a wet umbrella in a plastic bag that Most of our White House team told me there's no way you're going to walk in with that umbrella, Romans. They're going to take that away from you. And they didn't. This was also in the Washington Hilton ballroom, where there were people who were staying in the hotel who had nothing to do with this event, who were walking around and milling around and had access to some of these places. What was your experience like going in? Was it the same as mine, where you just kind of showed the ticket and there wasn't a heck of a lot of scrutiny?
Yeah, and I think that's important context. I mean, this is one of the biggest hotels in Washington, and it is still in full operation on the night of this dinner every year. There are people eating in the restaurants, drinking at the bars, and in some cases milling about near the conference rooms that host some of the pre-parties around the dinner. I have been many times, and usually when the president attends, the security is significantly tighter than it is when he doesn't. And I was fully prepared to spend much more time waiting in line to get through the bags, to have a more complete search. I had a similar experience. I think I showed my ticket once, maybe twice. I never took out my ID. I was probably one of those people who told you to leave the umbrella behind, because I've had umbrellas, water bottles, you name it, confiscated by Secret Service at different events throughout the course of my career. This seemed much more designed to get people in and out expeditiously, which as an attendee is lovely, until it becomes problematic. So that said, I will say the Secret Service's position and the White House's position today is that ultimately the system did work to protect the president. This person was stopped just past a security checkpoint, a full floor above where this event was taking place. But as he himself said in those same writings, he was surprised at how easy it was to get a room at this hotel, to sort of check out this process and to get that close. Now, I think we can have a discussion, and this discussion is being had, I think, at very high levels, of whether, not getting off a shot at the president should be considered a success for an event that ultimately had to be canceled at the cost of, probably tens of thousands of dollars and all of this after effect drama. The president was fine, but there's no way you can describe this as a sort of a successful event. How do you harden an event like this to make it safer for everyone involved without kind of overdoing it and getting into the situation where every event which is attended by political figures in this country becomes like the State of the Union, or becomes sort of a police state lockdown event? That's the delicate balance that the Secret Service and their partners try to find at every event, and I think there'll be a lot of discussions going forward about whether they did the right thing here.
Look, this was alarming what happened on Saturday, but the administration officials have been emphasizing the shooter was stopped before he got too far, and he was stopped by the security systems that were in place. Let's listen to the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche with Kristen on Meet the Press on Sunday.
The suspect didn't get very far. He barely broke the perimeter, and by barely, I mean by a few feet. And so while this was extraordinarily dangerous and put a lot of lives at risk, and there's no doubt that's something that we're going to have to learn from over the next couple weeks, the system worked.
So this is the message we're hearing from the administration, but they must be discussing stricter protocols for events ahead. I can't imagine they wouldn't be.
And they are, and they will be. And the press secretary confirmed that today, that there will be meetings and discussions going on about how to make these events safer for the president. They understand that that's their responsibility. And if you just look at the calendar, I mean, he's got all these America 250th anniversary celebrations coming up. There's the World Cup. There will be another presidential election in 2.5 years that will, likely have him out on the road substantially. He's not traveled a ton so far this term, but he probably will more even for the midterms. If anybody with a gun can show up at the perimeter and shut an event down, you don't have to get a shot off at the president to strangle discourse in this country, to cut off political speech. And, the president alluded to this on Saturday night, that's ultimately not something that can be acceptable to Americans.
Yeah, this was an event to celebrate the First Amendment, which is ironic that it was shut down so quickly and so easily by someone on the perimeter. Let's talk about what the president says about his East Wing ballroom. Multiple times since this shooting, he has said this is why he needs to have that East Wing ballroom. He says that security would have prevented this incident. That construction, of course, has been challenged in court. Wave a magic wand. Assume there was this big East Wing ballroom. Would that have prevented this attack from happening at this dinner?
I suppose if it were possible for this dinner to be held in that ballroom, and there are a lot of questions about whether that would be the case. I mean, there's been no indication that the White House intends to open up this ballroom for private events, which this is what this would be. I mean, the White House Correspondents Association isn't part of the White House. It is a private association of journalists who cover the White House. I'm a member. We pay for the Washington Hilton ballroom. I mean, that is, privately secured. It's also 3 times the size, give or take, of what the White House ballroom is designed to be. So this specific event couldn't be held in that space for at least those 2 reasons and for a variety of others. I mean, the president's points about the ballroom aren't wrong generally, though. I mean, the White House does lack a space to hold big events that can be done securely indoors, whether they be state dinners or, inaugurations. The indoor cold weather plan for inaugurations is in the Capitol building. That would also require a fraction of as many people as show up outside. So, he's made his case on this and he's made his points pretty clearly, but it's not really an apples to apples of like, if only we had this ballroom, this particular thing could have been avoided. Other similar things that the White House hosts could be avoided. But it also, again, raises the question of, is the only place the president is safe to speak to large crowds on the grounds of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? Is that acceptable to the White House? I don't think so. So they're making their argument. They have a very specific goal here to advance getting that ballroom, through this court battle and back up and running in terms of the construction. But it's not at a direct kind of apples to apples comparison.
Garrett, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
The British are coming has quite a different ring to it these days. King Charles and Queen Camilla's first state visit since taking the throne began today, marking the 250th anniversary of American independence from British rule. And Washington is rolling out the royal red carpet, from a tea ceremony with President Trump and First Lady Melania to a joint address to Congress and a stop in New York City. But the visit comes at a fraught moment in the special relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. From the war with Iran to the scandals surrounding associates of Jeffrey Epstein, tensions are high. Meanwhile, safety is a top concern following the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner this weekend. For more on what's at stake for King Charles's trip across the pond, I'm joined by NBC News royal contributor Emily Nash, who is in Washington, D.C. for the visit. Hi, Emily.
Hi there.
Right, this trip is coming at a tense time for all those reasons I just named, and this new concern about security, this shooting incident at the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend. Despite concerns about safety, Buckingham Palace decided not to postpone this trip. Was there any talk of canceling, or how are they dealing with new security issues?
Well, security is something that's been in the works, the planning for many, many weeks. And we have great teams on both sides, I'm told, handling this. And there obviously were very fraught discussions on Saturday overnight and then throughout Sunday before the palace confirmed that the trip would go ahead as planned. But my understanding is that, there have obviously been reassurances, but if at any point something feels off, that they reserve the right to tweak things. There will be minor adjustments to the programme, likely things that nobody will pick up on, to allow for that extra sense of jeopardy that we're all feeling post-Saturday night.
Emily, King Charles has visited the United States some 19 times, but this is the first trip since he was crowned king. It comes at a tense time for the special relationship between the United States and the U.K. The American president has been highly critical of the U.K. and NATO's lack of involvement in the president's war with Iran. In an interview with the BBC, President Trump said his relationship with the U.K. Prime Minister Keir Starmer could only recover if he changed course on immigration. I'm wondering, what role do you expect these tensions to play in this visit, if any?
Well, it's a brilliant question, and one we have all been asking. Obviously, the king is above politics. He's our head of state, not our head of government. So really, these aren't the kind of topics we'd expect him to be discussing. However, we know that President Trump has made clear that he will raise issues with the king. The palace have been very careful about this. When they sit down for a bilateral in the Oval Office together, there will be stills, photographs only. We're not going to have footage. We won't have print reporters in the room. And so those discussions, should they take place, will happen fully behind closed doors. And that's really because the king can't get involved in this kind of politics. It's not constitutionally his role. And the emphasis from both the palace and the British Embassy is very much that the king is here to celebrate a relationship that transcends the individuals involved at present. This is a relationship that goes back 250 years, and it's a really crucial one for all of us, regardless of what's going on in the current moment. And that is very much the focus that they are directing us towards.
The king, he is a monarch. He's not a political leader. But I wonder, Does he help bridge a diplomatic divide in a way, just being in the room?
I think there's no question that the king plays an incredibly important soft diplomatic role in these situations. He, we know, is very well liked and respected by President Trump, as was his mother, the late Queen, before him. And it's a huge advantage, really, for the British that President Trump is an Anglophile, that he is so fond of the British royal family. And the king does have his ear. There's obviously a huge amount of respect between the two men. And this is a relationship that, of course, predates Mr. Trump being at the White House. They've known each other for many decades now, having first met in New York. They've kept up correspondence over the years. So there is a personal relationship at the heart of this as well, which, again, will transcend the politics that are going on. But of course, from the British government's perspective, who better to send into this very delicate situation right now than King Charles?
Also looming over this visit are the scandals surrounding the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The king's own brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, and the UK's former U.S. ambassador both had ties to Epstein. Mountbatten Windsor is under investigation by the British police for alleged misconduct in a public office following release of private emails with Epstein. British police also launched a criminal probe and arrested the UK's former U.S. ambassador back in February on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Now, this did not include allegations of sexual misconduct. Those men deny any wrongdoing. But the Trump administration has been highly criticized for its handling of the Epstein documents and the Epstein investigations. Trump's personal ties to Epstein have been scrutinized. He also denies wrongdoing. How could Epstein color this trip?
Well, there have been a lot of calls from Epstein survivors and also from members of Virginia Giuffre's family. This is, of course, the lady who made accusations against the now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in the first place. And this could potentially put the king in a very difficult situation. If someone were to shout out or heckle him, it's happened back in the UK over recent weeks. But really, he's in a very difficult position. Again, he is head of state. The UK law courts are in his name. They are His Majesty's courts. And he is in a situation where he can't do anything that could potentially prejudice the ongoing investigations back in the UK. And that unfortunately includes having meetings with, these survivors who have a right to be heard, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting because the Queen in particular, Queen Camilla, has done so much work with survivors of sexual and domestic abuse over the years. And in fact, will be meeting with representatives from organisations who support survivors during her visit here. But they have made clear that they can't meet anyone specifically involved with the Epstein scandal as a result of these ongoing investigations. So there's a very clear line being drawn here. The king, again, like the political question, cannot be seen to get involved in any of this.
This 4-day trip to the U.S. in D.C., they're having tea with President Trump and the First Lady Melania. King Charles will deliver an address to Congress tomorrow. What else is on the docket?
Well, King Charles will speak again in the evening at the state dinner at the White House, which will be a suitably glitzy affair. We'll have comments from President Trump as well. He delivered a fantastic speech, actually, back in Windsor in September in the same circumstances. And I think it's always interesting to see the interplay between these two world leaders. But then moving on from there, there's a day in New York. There'll be a visit to pay their respects to the 9/11 victims at the memorial there. There will be a huge event to celebrate the King's Trust. This is a major charity founded by the sovereign 50 years ago to help young people into training and employment. The Queen will carry out a literary engagement. And then on Thursday, they're out in Virginia. They'll attend a block party and meet with Appalachian cultural groups. So they're going to have an opportunity to meet lots of Americans from all walks of life.
And will they be checking in with Prince Harry, who lives in the United States and is raising 2 American children?
There is no plan for the king to see his youngest son while he's in America, not least because his schedule is, absolutely packed with engagements. And this is quite a demanding trip already for a monarch who is in his late 70s and still undergoing cancer treatment. We know, of course, that his relationship with his son has been very fraught over recent years, but there have been moves to reconcile. But I think most people would recognise that this is not the moment for them to come together while such a high profile and high stakes diplomatic mission is underway.
Emily, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. If you like what you heard, press the subscribe button.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.